Namaskar. Good morning to all. Honorable External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar, Ambassador Kamal Sibal, Ambassador Rajiv Sikri ji, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all on the occasion of today's event organized for the release of Ambassador Sikri's latest book, Strategic Conundrums, Reshaping India's Foreign Policy. I'd like to offer our congratulations to the author on his latest book. Some years ago, in 2009, Ambassador Sikri had written a book titled Rethinking India's Foreign Policy. Since then, a lot has changed in the world. His latest book is welcome as it will stimulate informed discussions on the current challenges before Indian policymakers. We are grateful to External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar for finding time from his extremely busy schedule to be here today. Thank you, sir. Dr. Jaishankar needs no introduction. As India's top diplomat, he is a global personality. He enjoys great following in India and abroad, and particularly among the youth. He has made enormous contribution to the cause of explaining India's foreign policy to national and global audiences. His books, The India Way and Why Bharat Matters, are essential reading for anyone who wishes to understand India's foreign policy framework and strategies in the last 10 years. I would also like to thank Ambassador Kamal Sibal for participating in today's conversation with the author on his latest book. A former Foreign Secretary, Ambassador Sibal, India's veteran diplomat and a leading commentator on foreign policy issues. Friends, this is a timely book on a highly relevant subject. The world is no longer what it used to be. Disorder is deepening, turmoil is increasing, rebalancing is underway, violence, conflicts, tensions, the levels of these are all-time high. At such a time of churn and change, there is need to constantly identify challenges and opportunities and review our options. Reshaping the foreign policy in the light of the global and regional changes will be a constant endeavor. As India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar has the responsibility to steer Indian foreign policy in today's trying times. Prime Minister and External Affairs Minister have made tireless efforts to position India at the high tables of international politics. Some memorable moments of India's foreign policy stand out. This should not be an era of wars. I think all of us resonate with that great statement. Differences should not be allowed to become disputes. India put Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam as the overarching theme of G20 presidency last year. India rallied the voice of Global South at different fora. India's championing of security and growth for all as a framework for maritime cooperation. India's advocacy of Atmanirbharta and the local for global as a strategy to build Indian strengths. I think these are only few of many moments which define India's foreign policy and framework today. Yet, the real world is brutal. India is facing acute instability and fragility in its immediate neighborhood. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Maldives, Pakistan, Nepal are in varying degrees of turmoil. This is having an impact on India. Navigating the contradictions of great power contestations is going to be challenging. Dealing with China is the greatest of our challenges. Global economic environment is uncertain. Multilateralism has become ineffective in dealing with the larger questions of peace, security, and cooperation. An effective strategy is needed to deal with the consequences of climate change. We had 2-day-long discussions on these issues at the VIF very recently. In fact, yesterday we finished that conclave. Senior members of the Indian Strategic Community participated in it. The conclusion was clear. Our policies will need to be upgraded to meet the challenges to India's security and development. The book takes up many of these issues. We eagerly look forward to EAM's keynote address, author's remarks, and the conversation between Ambassador Sibal and the author. Now I request the EAM to release the book. Now, according to the program, I now request the author to kindly make a few remarks.
Thank you, Arvind. I'm most grateful to the Vivekananda International Foundation for organizing this event, and of course to Honorable Minister Dr. Jaishankar for having taken time out of his busy schedule to be with us this morning and to kindly release the book. Thank you all for coming here and giving me this support, and to Ambassador Sybil for kindly agreeing to be a co-panelist and have a little discussion with him. So why did I write this book? As Dr. Gupta has said, it's a fast-changing world. There are lots of problems in the neighborhood, in the world. Which way the world will go is uncertain. I think we are at a turning point in world history, probably the most important since the end of the Second World War. And I think that India's growth, stability, security, and prosperity increasingly depends on the foreign policy choices that we make in this world. India is much more connected. There are so many sections of our society, people who have a stake and an interest in what is going on. And then I think the big change which has come about is that India's aspirations to be, as Dr. Jaishankar put it, be a leading player. There are also, I think, public expectations that India should play a greater role, a sense of pride there. Now, the thing is that for a rising path, the path is never smooth, and therefore one has to look at different foreign policy choices. While I'm very happy to have the strategic community and policymakers look at what I've written, I'm particularly hopeful that this book will interest a lot of people who have an interest in foreign policy, members of the general public who are intellectually aware but want to have a better understanding, and particularly the youth, of what our foreign policy challenges are. Sitting here, I cannot but recall the words of Swami Vivekananda 125 years ago. It's so prescient. He says, "We cannot do without the world outside India. It was our foolishness that we thought we could, and we have paid the penalty by about 1,000 years of slavery. You must expand if you want to live." Why this title, Strategic Conundrums? Well, because the future is uncertain and the paths for India are unclear. We have a situation which is not so recognized, but we are practically in another world war. It's a divided world. And as I see it, all the established powers are getting weaker and India is getting stronger. We're still not there, but I see in this an opportunity for India to rise. How do we do it? That is the task. And of course, there are going to be pressures in India, because when you become, already we are the fifth largest, and we soon hope to become the third largest economy of the world, nobody can ignore you. And there will be pressures on us. And then there is India's very location, its geographic location in the heart of Asia, the Indian Ocean. That gives it an importance that other countries may not have. And let's not forget that India was divided in 1947 it was an effort, among other things, to ensure that India does not reach its full potential. So that we should never forget. In my book, a lot of the space has been taken with neighbors, and rightly so, because unless our neighbors also prosper, we are unlikely to do so. And there is a problem with our neighbors because these are artificial neighbors created after 1947, not the neighbors we traditionally had. And there's a huge size and power differential with India. And in my understanding, I think that all our neighbors have a somewhat insecure and artificial identity. And then you get anti-Indianism and the Indian bogey, which play a role. Of course, it is also my view that I think Mr. Nehru made some strategic mistakes because he had a very limited perception of India's security, which was limited to post-partition India, not the civilizational India. And when we had the opportunities to clean up our neighborhood, to have a strategic frontiers, secure strategic frontiers, we did not take those opportunities. And then, of course, as I said, there are outside powers who are always trying to meddle in muddy the waters for us. And I think we should always understand that whatever they do in our neighborhood is always related to India because of India's size potential and the strategic location on the Indian Ocean. So what do we do? Obviously, I have no clear answers, but I think that broadly we need to have a magnanimous approach. We have to treat our smaller neighbors, Pakistan is an exception, obviously, with magnanimity. But at the same time, we should have some red lines. And I think that the more interaction and dialogue we have, the more we integrate the economies of India with these countries, the more it will be difficult for the relations to get too bad, irrespective of which government is in power in that state. There are many other things to be done. I will not go into that. But certainly we need to engage our neighbors more, and we need to devote more resources, attention, not just at the government level, but at the public level, because how the public behaves with neighbors also has a role. Well, Pakistan, as I said, is a totally different game, but then there is also China. And it is quite clear that China wants to be number one, and India will never be part of a Sino-centric world order. The border issue, I don't see changing because it's a way the Chinese will keep India off balance. And I think a clean solution is unlikely because the public positions of the two sides are so far apart. There's Tibet, which is likely to get aggravated once His Holiness Dalai Lama is not there. Now, how we tackle China is a big problem. And this is where I think having friends, powerful friends like USA is extremely important. But that's not the only reason why we think that the relationship with the United States is the most important relationship we have. There's questions of trade, technology, people-to-people contact, defense cooperation. But at the same time, we also value our strategic autonomy, and the Americans never have believed in the concept of equality. You see how they treat even their closest allies, and I think Kissinger said it's more dangerous to be a close friend than an enemy of America. They have multiple levers. They are, of course, a great power. And they will, I'm sure, try to ensure that India does not emerge as another China, which could potentially threaten the American position as number one in the world. So I think that we should, and we have been pushing back on where we think our vital interests are involved, but where, otherwise we just have to work out compromises. We also should see what are the strengths and leverages that we have with powers like the United States. Then there's Russia, often ignored, but in my view, never to be ignored or underestimated. And I think it's good that we are maintaining a sound relationship with Russia. There are the whole rest of the world also, but I will not go into that. There is no time. And I will now just take a minute or so to briefly outline what I think is the way forward, which is the title of my last chapter. And here I have about 5 issues that are important. One is the concept of strategic autonomy. I think no question about it. Our self-perception, our interests, our traditions, our size, we cannot be dependent on another country for our security. Nobody will give that to us. And we must have an independent foreign policy, which we have had since 1947. The second, very important, is that unless we develop economically, militarily, technologically, become more self-reliant, we will be unable to achieve our goals. Thirdly, I think we have to leverage our geopolitical location and strengths with India in the center of the Indian Ocean, with what I call 5 arcs. There's the arc of prosperity to the east, the arc of energy from the west to Russia and Siberia, the arc of communications, which is the Indian Ocean, the arc of instability, which is around us, extending westward up to the Mediterranean, and the arc of uncertainty to the north. We are right at the middle. We have a location. But then we also have our geopolitical weaknesses, our neighbors. I've talked about that. How do we overcome these? Of course, we need good leadership. And I think we're very fortunate that we have in Prime Minister Modi, now in his 3rd term, a leader, thinks strategically, thinks about India first. Whether this will continue in the coming decades, I cannot say. I certainly hope so. And finally, this is very important. We need the support of a nationalistic, political, and intellectual elite, not people who are looking for outside patrons for intervention. And I would like to here invoke Swami Vivekananda once again, who said, "There is another defect in us. If one of our countrymen stands up and tries to become great, we all try to hold him back down. But if a foreigner comes and tries to kick us, it is all right." I think we must get over that. I am a great believer and follower of Swami Vivekananda, and I will just conclude by quoting from him what he had to say about being strong and having faith in ourselves. He says, faith in ourselves. This is the secret of greatness. Have faith in yourselves and stand up on that faith and be strong. That is what we need. Feel that you are great and you become great. The Englishman who is talking about 1890s. Englishman believes he is born the Lord of the world. He believes he is great and can do anything in the world. Today, maybe England's ambitions are a little lower, but you have America, which feels it's number one, must remain number one. It's the indispensable nation. You have China, which feels it's the middle kingdom and has to have its place in the world. Do we have any ambition? Unless we have an ambition, we will not achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful introduction. And now I request the EAM to kindly address us.
I think my batchmate Yogender Kumar, who's sitting at the back, would bear me out that the first person we met in the Ministry of External Affairs when we clocked in there in 1977 was Rajiv Sikri. Now, over the years, our careers crisscrossed and we spoke a lot. We often disagreed, but he was always very open about talking to people with whom he didn't necessarily agree. And I see today's occasion as a continuing conversation with him. Now, first of all, I'd like to congratulate him. I can now feel, I now know what it's like to be an author and the pride which you have when you bring out a book. So once again, my felicitations. But I do want to say that the reason why such books are important is that for any country, particularly a country aspiring to be a leading power, you develop your foreign policy through dialogue, through discourse, through debates, through a churning. And such occasions are part of that. Now, the other, I would say, reason which I felt was this book was important is that it's written in a way for the generalist. It is not written for the MEA by the MEA. So the language is simple, the concepts are clear, the structure is such that somebody can relate to it quite easily. And I value that because I think it's very important today to demystify foreign policy. My own endeavors in the last few years is to take foreign policy out of MEA and out of Delhi and try to actually get a larger national conversation started up on it. Now, on the book itself, he was good enough to give me a copy in advance. I would say I agree with some of it. I'm agnostic about some parts of it. I disagree politely with some of it. There are a few honorable mentions of me. I'm also a member of the small cabal about which he's more critical when it comes to the US nuclear deal. But that said, I think I took the book in the spirit in which it is written. Now, I also want to say that, the way the case has been presented, it's not unrealistic because often, I need to be honest here, there's a kind of wisdom which comes after retirement. Okay, and it's amazing how people forget what the constraints and limitations of government is. So what I liked about the book is it's practical, it's grounded, it doesn't over prescribe, and whether it's the general person, the average person, or someone in the business, it's something very easy to relate to. Now, having said that, I want to really focus on the title. And the title for this reason, that he has framed it as conundrums. And I want you to reflect on that word conundrum. Because normally, in the diplomatic world, we would phrase it as relationships, as landscapes, as scenarios. But a conundrum is, by definition, confusing. It's difficult. It's a bit of a riddle. It can be a challenge. And most of all, it conveys a certain complexity. And I'm very glad he did that because sometimes when we debate foreign policy, we are in the danger of sliding into very black and white options and scenarios where people simplify it, they really dumb it down more to make a polemical point than to actually carry out serious analysis. Now, if we are looking at conundrums, for every country in the world, neighbors are always a conundrum, because neighboring relationships for every country in the world are the most difficult. And they can never be solved. They are continuing relationships which will always throw up problems. So when people sometimes come and say, that's happened in Bangladesh and this has happened in Maldives, I think they need to look around the world and tell me which country in the world doesn't have challenges and problems and complexities vis-a-vis its neighbors. I think it's in the very nature of being a neighbor that this will happen. And in fact, the very closeness, which is the definition of a neighbor, is actually the complication. And there are other aspects of it, I think some of which Rajiv spoke about. The second are major powers. Major powers, again, will always be a conundrum because they're major, because of the breadth of their interests, that they will always have an agenda which will overlap with us, but will, to differing degrees, also diverge with us. So to me, the focus of the book and the description of each of these relationships as a conundrum, I think, is a very sensible, realistic way of actually explaining what awaits us. Now, I would only add that in the case of China, you actually have a double conundrum. They're a neighbor and a major power. So he spoke about the challenges of China. Part of it, as I said, is the fact that they fit this double definition. Now, let me say a few words about the neighbors. So Rajiv speaks about Akhand Bharat. I take that as a message about the importance of regionalization. And I think that's a real issue that today this country needs to debate and certainly practice and see how we get regionalization right, because as the biggest country of the region, we will be the biggest beneficiaries of greater, deeper regionalization. So the question for us there is, with whom and on what terms do we regionalize? And some of the models here, in a way, there is a debate today in the country about, and not just in the country, in the neighborhood, about SAARC and BIMSTEC, and all of you know the difference. I think that is a contrast which illustrates some of the challenges and the opportunities of regionalization. I think it's also in the neighborhood, and that's a subject I will dilate on further. The real issue is that of overlapping identities and versus forging new ones. So everywhere there is history at play, but there is politics which often contests history. And this, in a way, is a perennial challenge for India's relationship with all its neighbors. Now, I'm following the structure of the book. If we start with the neighbors, and Rajiv has started with Pakistan. So let me say this. I think the era of uninterrupted dialogue with Pakistan is over. Actions have consequences. And insofar as Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, I think 370 is done. So the issue today is, what kind of relationship can we possibly contemplate with Pakistan? Rajiv suggests that perhaps India is content to continue at the current level of relationship. Maybe yes, maybe no. What I do want to say is we are not passive, and whether events take a positive or a negative direction, either way, we will react. Let me move to Afghanistan. Where Afghanistan is concerned, I think there are, I know we use this phrase often, but there's actually strong people-to-people relations. There is actually at a societal level, there is a certain goodwill for India. But as we look at Afghanistan, I think the basics of statecraft should not be forgotten. There is international relations 101 at work here. So when we today review our Afghan policy, I think we are very clear-eyed about our interests. We are not confused by inherited wisdom that is before us. And we must appreciate that the Afghanistan with the presence of America, for us, is very different from the Afghanistan without the presence of America. Having said that, let me move to India's east, Bangladesh, for obvious reasons. A lot of recent interest in that relationship. And I actually was struck by Rajiv's description. He says Bangladesh is India locked and our northeast is Bangladesh locked. And that, in a way, is a kind of, I would say, a sort of a succinct summary of one important aspect of our relationship. Now, all of you are also aware that with Bangladesh, since its independence, our relationship has gone up and down. And it is natural that we will deal with the government of the day. But we also have to recognize that there are political changes, and the political changes can be disruptive. And clearly here we have to look for mutuality of interest. Going further east, there is Myanmar, which is both relevant and remote at the same time. And here again, I think the Northeast, the context of the Northeast, our Northeast, is the overriding one. And we today, I think, have to find a balance between the government and other stakeholders, because that is the reality on the ground. So if I were to move south to the Indian Ocean region, where Sri Lanka is concerned, again, Rajiv brings out the suspicions of history, of recent history. And I would say this is one relationship where the Modi government, frankly, had a somewhat difficult inheritance. And, a lot of our challenges were how to reassure without in any way diluting our interests in that relationship. At this time, there are two problems. One in the public realm, which pertains to the international maritime boundary line, the fishing issue, which is a recurring issue, particularly in the political space. And from a strategic national security perspective, China's presence and activities in respect of Sri Lanka. But I would say here, and again, that's a point which Rajiv recognizes, that there has been a significant shift in public perception about India in Sri Lanka, centered around the fact that when they were in such deep trouble, we were really the only country which came forward in a massive way and in a timely way. So if Sri Lanka has been able to recover significantly from where they were, a lot of it, I think, even the Sri Lankan politics and Sri Lankan public attributes it to the relationship with India. Where Maldives is concerned, again, we've had ups and downs, not just in the nature of the regime. There have been ups and downs in our own approach to Maldives. We've had the 1988 intervention, but yet we were very impassive in 2012 when there was a change of government. So you can see that there's a certain lack of constancy here. But I would say that it is a relationship in which we are very deeply invested, and there is today a recognition in Maldives. Certainly, I saw that in my recent visit. That this relationship is a steadying force as they get into somewhat choppy waters where their own prospects are concerned, especially in terms of the economic challenges. Moving north, there is Nepal, of course. Again, the point made in the book is that the transition from the historical relationship to the contemporary one is not an easy one. I think that's really the message in the book, and perhaps no relationship illustrates more the fact that closeness cuts both ways. So, but I want to say here that today in Nepal, and we've just had Foreign Minister Azu Dioba here, there is a much deeper understanding, a much broader understanding of the value of power trade for them. They now export close to about 1,000 megawatts of electricity for us. So they realize the advantages which they accrue from that. Also from the fact that we have actually been much more forthcoming in terms of transit, trade and transit where Nepal is concerned. And, in many ways, and this is a common point, I will talk about it later as well, whether it is power, whether it is fuel, whether it is movement of goods, the last decade actually has linked Nepal much more closely to India, as it has, by the way, most of our other neighbors, Pakistan. Where Bhutan is concerned, obviously, it is politically the most consistent, the most positive. And we have, I would say, certainly in a pro-rata way, but even otherwise. I mean, still the largest budget head in the Ministry of External Affairs pertains to Bhutan. So I think that itself should tell you, the importance of Bhutan in our relationship. So these were actually the individual, the conundrums which Rajiv spelled out in the book. And I think each of these conundrums, this briefly is the current state of play. And you can see, that this will always be work in progress. That at no stage with a neighbor can we ever say we have arrived or we've sorted it out. I mean, it will keep continuing. It's in the nature of life. Now, having touched on the individual relationship, let me sum it up. And that summing up, I would say, is in our neighborhood first policy. So what is the neighborhood first policy? I think it is actually to proof the ties against these ups and downs that I'm talking about. That we know this will happen. That, when I sometimes read saying, didn't you see, this was happening in Bangladesh, or that was happening in Afghanistan, or something was happening in Maldives. Of course we did. I mean, we just didn't see it now. I mean, you have to actually build it into your planet. Because every one of our neighbors, first of all, today, unlike the past, most of them are democratic countries. And in democratic politics, there will be change of regimes. And then sometimes you will have disruptive changes. Sometimes you will have organic changes, but sometimes there will be those quantum shifts. So we cannot be, you cannot start thinking then about what we are going to do. So we have to build it into hardwire it into our policy. That I expect that these would be the bandwidths in which that relationship would move? And what do I do when it hits one or the other extremity? And the answer to that is really to give each one of these relationships a heavier structural ballast. So when we talk today about more infrastructure, when we look at more movement of people, we say people to people. I mean, if you look at a country like Bangladesh, 1.3 million people come and take the visas from India. When we speak about infrastructure, today, with many of our neighbors, we supply electricity, we supply fuel. Our trade has increased, our ICPs have grown, the movement of vehicles and trucks of various kinds have increased. There are rail links which were not there before. There are bus movements, there is tourism. So if you take the totality of it, I would say the deeper, the stronger you can make these linkages, the more you proof it really against the volatility, which is inherent in neighborly ties. But there is another aspect of it, and that relates to the state of the world. If the state of the world continues to be volatile, and there's every reason for us to expect that, our neighbors actually need to shelter in that storm, and we are part of that shelter. So if you look today, I spoke about Sri Lanka, where their economy was literally melting down, and it was a combination really of the delayed after effects of the COVID and the Ukraine consequences for them, and some issues of their own. But what our neighbors today do see, that whether it is food shortage, fertilizer shortage, vaccine issues, any essential commodities, financial support, there is India. And I think if that sense of reassurance and reliability gets stronger and deeper, it actually deals with a lot of other challenges. So I cannot expect that those challenges will not happen, because the politics of their particular societies will throw up those kinds of problems. What I have to do is to create a structure which allows me to deal with those anticipated issues. It's interesting. Again, it's natural in our neighborhood that people would say that in some form or the other we are interfering. The truth is actually the neighbors try to pull you into their politics. When it suits them, they want you in. When it doesn't suit them, they want you out. So our challenge is actually how to get it right. So the neighborhood is truly, the entire neighborhood is a conundrum. We have individual conundrums there. And I would say it will always be, a situation where we will have issues, we will be dealing with issues. It's not, by very nature, the relationships where I would say we should have very, very high and continuous expectations. Now, if I can briefly shift to the major powers. The major powers, let me start with the United States. In Rajiv's book, of course, he has a big segment on the nuclear deal. It's the part where I disagree most with him. But I would say at the end of it all, I think the message of the US chapter is that all is well that ends well. So he recognizes at the end of it all that today, the US relationship is both for strategic purposes and for economic purposes, in many ways, a very invaluable relationship for us. Now, where the US is concerned, I again accept the history. I think all of us, none of us are in denial, and he brings it out in quite graphically, but succinctly. We've had a series of challenges with the United States in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. The challenge for us is when we think of multipolarity and strategic autonomy. Because of that history, it is often a concept where we posit ourselves against the United States. Now, the reality of the world is today something very different. That if we look at where the pressures are, the primary sources of pressure, they're no longer the United States. So, in a way, because the world has changed, our understanding of the US has changed. And by the way, the US understanding of us has too. And therefore, I would actually argue that US is today indispensable for our multipolarity to go ahead. That if we need that decision-making space, that freedom, we need countries whose interest it is that we have those margins on our side. So, I would also say in some ways, and again, I think in a way, a lot of what Rajiv's apprehensions are based on history. I don't dispute the history, but I think today we need, when we look at the US, we must also understand we are talking about convergences. I don't think anybody sober and sensible in policy making would say that we have a congruence with the United States. I mean, the US by its very nature and India by its very nature will always have interests which will differ and diverge from those of the other partners. So if we actually understand what are the expectations of this relationship, that this relationship is not about, it's not about an alliance, it is not about convergence, congruence. It is about convergence. It is about overlapping interests. It is about the ability to work together on issues and areas and theaters which suit us. And you can see that. There, even today, there are regions and issues on which we profoundly agree with the US. And there are clearly some issues on which we don't. It's on full public display. And that is where, in a way, I was again struck by an observation which Rajiv makes in the book, and I sort of quote it for you, where he says, we need to accurately gauge and leverage the compulsions of the United States to seek a better relationship with India. And this bit, I don't entirely agree. Wait till the relative balance of power is less tilted in favor of the United States. Now, I don't have a problem with the end objective, but I have a problem with that wait. Because I don't think in this world we can cold start a relationship at some point where it's convenient for us. I think we saw the opportunity, we saw the opportunity when it came. I would say the record of the last 20 years bears out the fact that the choices which were made in respect of this relationship have actually been the right ones. I think today, if you look at our strategic position, a lot of it is derived from that. Where China is concerned, again, what Rajiv does is he brings out the duality of the unavoidable economic factors and counterposes it with a strategic challenge. I think it's something which is widely accepted today in this country. What I did appreciate was his recognition that in the last few years, we have done something, not enough in my view, but still something substantial to fix the border infrastructure deficit. And I think that is really key today to maintaining peace and tranquility in the border areas. He has mentioned in passing the economic gaps. Again, I would have, I really think it's a subject worth dilating upon, which is the neglect of manufacturing in this country and the costs that we are paying as a result. And the gaps that, on the one hand, the same people who block manufacturing in this country also then chastise the government about the trade gaps with China. So they want to have it both ways. And I think, in all honesty, that should be called out. But the other point really is the strategic confusion about China. That we could actually describe this as a strategic and cooperative partnership in 2005. If you look back upon it, I think it's an astounding mistake. So the fact is that we have today to deal with China in a global framework, and I think that's really the point which comes out. Where Russia is concerned, I would like to quote Rajiv here. He calls it a strategic but unequal partnership that has made India more self-reliant. I'm not sure anybody would really differ with that. But what I would say today is that Russia now is following its own lookish policy. That after 2022, there has been a profound shift in the manner in which Russia approaches the world, looks at the world. And we in India need to understand, absorb, and take advantage of it, rather than let our decisions be clouded by a larger narrative which is not our narrative. So, where Russia is concerned, I think again, there is a Eurasian balance that we have to be sensitive to. It's a core strategic requirement for us. But I would also say, if you look at trade with Russia, which has gone up 5 times, and it's not just a simple oil issue. I think I would urge you to look at it much more deeply. That there is an economic complementarity between India and Russia, and we should not be intimidated from pursuing the advantages of that complementarity. On other P5 members, I think he's given that a short shrift. I would have hoped he would have been kinder to France, UK, and the European Union. Maybe the next book. But all in all, I would say, where the big powers are concerned, for us, the metric of judgment should be really, the way we look at the conundrum, where is our national security benefits or risks in that relationship? Does it help the growth of our comprehensive national power? Does it expand our freedom of choice? I think these should be the basic metrics. So finally, let me come to the conclusion. I'm sorry I've dilated a bit more than I intended. On the conclusion, one, of course, I sum up in a way his last chapter, which is that we need to assess the global order. And that's like the contemporary way of saying what Swami Vivekananda did there, that we are not living in isolation, that we have to look at the state of the world and make our calculations accordingly. To the point that geography matters, I do think it matters, but I also think it is not self-fulfilling. So today, when we look at IMEC or INSTC or the Polar Route or even Indo-Pacific, I think each one of this is a testimony to the fact that geography matters. On neighborhood, because a very large part of the book is on neighborhood, I think as I say, the challenge is to get the balance right. But overall, I totally agree with him that India must be a lifting tide for the entire neighborhood. I mean, that should be our policy. And to my mind, that means a generous and non-reciprocal policy, but a policy where there has to be sensitivity to our, especially to our national security requirements. There is in the neighborhood, of course, put China aside, but I think Pakistan is to some degree an exception to that approach. On the extended neighborhood, which he also speaks about, you can see in the last few years a significant evolution in Indian thinking, at least in policy making thinking. So where it comes to maritime security, you have the Sagar outlook. And when it comes, the kind of priority which today is given to the Gulf was badly needed. But, I mean, if you look even at a country like UAE, it says something about us that between Indira Gandhi and Narendra Modi, no other Prime Minister of India even went there. If you look at Southeast Asia, I would say the big change, and it's certainly for us right now a source of frustration, is the physical connectivity, because it's got stuck in Myanmar. But it is something we have to make unstuck. And a lot of our Myanmar policy will revolve around what we have to do to get that connectivity going. I mean, if you ask me today, if I were to prioritize my Myanmar requirements, that would be right up there. On the global south, definitely it's a constituency. Definitely it is a base. As India rises, I think the global south has an interest in actually also identifying with India and working with us. And again, I must tell you, global south is a concept on which I've heard criticisms from actually all the P5, which means I must be doing something right. But the on the overall, as I say, I too would, in that sense, end with Swami Vivekananda, which is there is a world out there. We have to be very conscious of it. And the mistakes that we have made in our history of either isolating ourselves or lack of faith and confidence in our own abilities, I think these are our big challenges. I'm very confident that that will not happen now. But once again, let me conclude by congratulating Ambassador Rajiv Sikri on a book which I don't know about you, but at least it set me off for some time. Thank you very much.
So friends, you heard a masterly and authoritative view of India's foreign policy triggered by Ambassador Sikri's book. And I wish we have more of it. And I think all of us stand very educated and informed. And I think I'm sure there are lots of issues that we could discuss further, but we don't have the time for this. I don't know how you are placed. You got it, right? So, yeah, we have a bit. Yeah, sure. Okay. So I think we will continue the discussion amongst the two veteran diplomats. So I'll request Ambassador Kavasibal to take it forward.
Well, firstly, I think this conversation, there is no reflection to what Rajiv may say in terms of the questions I posed to him, would be relatively colorless because the foreign minister has given us such a masterly exposition of India's foreign policy, focusing on every aspect of your book. He seems to have read it even more carefully than I have. I don't know how he got the time to do that. It's a pretty fat book. Let me see if we can elevate our conversation to the level of the commentary that the foreign minister has made, external affairs minister has made on your book. Let me first say that, as was mentioned by the director, that yesterday and day before, or day before precisely, we had a panel discussion on our neighborhood policy. So this is something which is very much a matter of concern to us. But there is one aspect of it with which I've always fundamentally disagreed. And I will state my position and let me see what you think of it. Which is it that the assumption that India cannot grow and cannot interact with the rest of the world, strategically or otherwise, unless we have a stable and friendly neighborhood. Actually, empirical evidence shows this is not the case at all. As the external affairs minister mentioned, all big countries have major problems in their neighborhood, but that hasn't deterred them in any way from pursuing their larger politics globally and succeeding and rising. In our own case, We've had a very troubled neighborhood right from the time that we decided to open up our economy and this and that. This was the most difficult period in terms of pressures from our neighborhood, including from Pakistan. But yet we grew and we continue to grow. We signed the nuclear deal despite the instabilities in our neighborhood. We become the fifth largest economy despite the fact that our neighborhood is unstable. So I think we shouldn't exaggerate that. And number two, the problem is that we may have a neighborhood first policy, but our neighbors have a neighborhood first policy? They're not very clear in their mind, and they continue to play external cards against us, the China card in particular. Even though China's theory is that you must have friends in your neighborhood before looking for friends away from your shores. You look at Europe, it has a very troubled neighborhood. Even before the Ukraine conflict, if you look at Europe's relationship in the east and in the south, the Mediterranean rim is highly unstable. So you say that there should be develop more economic interdependence with our neighbors. There's always hesitation on their part. They don't want to be totally integrated with you because they feel vulnerable. I mean, we say that we should make them part of a larger economic sphere. But precisely for that reason, they would not want to do that in order to maintain their independence of action. And therefore, they bring China in, and China has a lot of resources. And they play that card very well. So would you want to change your thinking about whether we can't grow without our neighborhood?
You're right, Kamal. But I think it's a little more nuanced than what you said. I think we will grow. We have been growing, as you have said. But we can grow much, much faster if we have the neighborhood with us. And in order to reach our goal of being a developed country by 2047, we need to take the neighborhood with us. And this brings me to the second point you've mentioned, which is very important. I've covered it in my book, that our neighbors also have to understand that their growth and prosperity would depend on India. If they understand it, then there's hope. Now take Bangladesh. For the last 15 years, the policy that Sheikh Hasina followed vis-a-vis India has enabled Bangladesh to develop hugely. Its per capita income, its social indicators, its stability, its foreign exchange reserves, all that blew because they understood, or she understood, that Bangladesh's prosperity and stability depends on a good relationship with India. So I think that this is a very important question. For both of them, because ultimately India is the only guarantor of their security and their prosperity in these turbulent times, as Minister said.
Okay, I will not dwell on this subject further, but let me go to what you say about China. You're very pessimistic about relationship with China. But you say, and I'm not sure how we can do it on the ground, you're saying that the BRI should not succeed. The BRI should not succeed, the CPEC should fail. Now the CPEC should fail because of its own merits or demerits. But do we really have any leverage in our hand to ensure that BRI doesn't succeed or CPS fails? We have virtually no relationship with Pakistan. And BRI is international, and it is in all corners of the globe. And there is very little we can do. It maybe we can compete with China in Africa, a little bit in our neighborhood. But to have a view that we can actually, that our goal should be that the BRI should not succeed, to my mind, maybe it's not a realistic goal.
Well, there are some things which are not in public domain and which obviously cannot be discussed publicly. But I'm sure that our government is smart enough to know what are the levers that we might have to ensure that the BRI does fail. And I'm quite open about it. But, I mean, the Chinese are working against us in so many aspects. So if I say that my goal is to ensure that CPEC fails and the Baluchis are working towards that, what's wrong with it?
You mean we should take over POK? That's the only way we can ensure.
No, I don't think it is a question of taking over POK. This is at the Gwadar end. Well, ultimately, our goal is that POK should integrate, but not that it should be taken over in that way. But this is where I come to the mistakes that we made. That why did we not take the steps that would have prevented this POK connectivity with the Chinese-occupied East Turkestan? We made those mistakes. We didn't think strategically. So what I'm doing now is setting out a goal. How we achieve it, whether we can achieve it is another matter. But if I say this is not even my goal, obviously nothing is going to happen.
You know, you said, I wish we could do that. You said that we should engage in psychological warfare against China and puncture its concept as being the middle kingdom.
Yeah.
How do we do it?
Well, I think we have to put down the Chinese civilization, which is borrowed hugely from India. I don't know if you've read K.M. Panikar's book In Two Chinas, where he talks about how when he presented credentials and he had a chat with Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong said, in our country, there's a belief that if you've led a good and virtuous life, you will be reborn in the Western kingdom. It means at the psychological level, they owe a lot to us. I think we have to bring out how we are more prepared to deal with the world. Look at the way our people do in the global economy and the global tech structures and so forth. Do the Chinese do that? No. There's something that we have that they don't have. And I think we should leverage that. The other thing which I've talked about is that Tibet and East Turkestan, it is East Turkestan, not Xinjiang. Tibet and East Turkestan are occupied regions, have always been there, and we must not ever compromise on this aspect, because with the Chinese definition of Tibet includes Arunachal Pradesh, which is our integral part of India. There's no way that we can accept that their concept of Tibet includes Arunachal Pradesh. We should also, I think, bring in things like Kailash Mansarovar. They say, Tawang belongs to us, Dalai Lama was born there. Hello, Kailash Mansarovar is the most holy site for Hindus and Buddhists and Jains and so forth. And there was a time, which is there in a footnote in my book, when in Parliament, some members of Parliament asked Nehru, but why don't we put in a claim to Kailash Mansarovar? And he said, zamindari thodi hai ki hum le lenge. So that was the thinking. So let's think a little big, let's not be confined to, we are looking at Galwan and this, that, and the other. Let's take the game into the Chinese territory. If they can claim Tawang and Arunachal, why can't we claim parts which were of what is occupied East Turkestan that were part of India traditionally? And there's a lot of history in it, or the Kashmir connection with East Turkestan and so forth. So this is what I mean.
In the case of China, we have this conundrum, the real one on the ground, that our external affairs minister has repeatedly said, and rightly so, that we can't normalize our relations unless the situation on the border is normal. And yet, look at the kind of growth of our economic ties with China, trade ties with China. They have become almost the biggest trading partner. And the deficit is enormous with China. And now you have even the Economic Survey of India, which has proposed that we have to open our doors to China, because we need their technology and investment and this and that. And this has become a bit of a debate in the country, and this was there yesterday morning also, or the day before, when the chief economic advisor maintained his ground that you let me know whether we can do without Chinese technology and investment and trade and everything else. So in that light, how do we really solve the conundrum of dealing with China? And in this context, I would also mention that as it happens, countries that are in the forefront of trying to contain China, whether it is the United States and its partners, Japan or South Korea, their biggest trading partner is China. So there is a huge strategic conundrum that they face on how, on the one hand, contain China, on the other hand, trade with China, continue to trade with China, and in fact, by walking out of our CEP and everything else, leave the entire sphere in that area for China to expand this economic presence, and Japan and South Korea are part of it. So how do we handle this conundrum?
Very difficult conundrum to handle. I think there are arguments on both sides, but the national security consideration is definitely there. I think there's pressure on China also because the Indian market will get more and more important for China.
But just let me interrupt you. You also say that we must visualize the possibility of disintegration of China.
Why not? Why not?
Can you expatiate?
Well, I think that well, there are so many China experts. I think they would know much better than I do. But I think that there are numerous weaknesses, fault lines within China. There are many protest movements which happen. Now, if these were to coalesce, it could create a problem for China. We have seen how in Bangladesh or earlier in Maldives or Sri Lanka or Georgia or whatever it is, you had countries which a lot of disruptions have taken place. Can this be ruled out? I don't know. I think China has had a history of violent upheavals over the last century. So it's possible. On the one thing, on the RCEP, I think we took the right decision to get out of it, because the way the free trade agreements with ASEAN and the other countries have worked, it's not what we had anticipated. And we don't certainly want to give China a free ride via these countries.
Well, Jaishankar has just left, Mr. just left, but there was one question I wanted to pose to you, which relates to the United States.
To United States.
Because you also said in your book something which I have never agreed with, that India and US are natural partners.
It's in quotes.
Now, I agree we are strategic partners, we are partners. There's a lot of positives in our relationship. We can gain a lot from this relationship. But being natural partners, given the fact that US is the strongest power in the world, look at its history, look at its culture, look at its society, look at its way of functioning in the world, its hegemony, its desire to retain its dominance of the globe. You pointed out quite rightly that we have differences in policies towards Russia, Iran, Bangladesh, trade, digital services, intellectual property issues, that the worldview of the United States as well as the UK is that they will not allow India to become so powerful as to threaten US global dominance. I'm just quoting you. And in addition to that, there are human rights issues, religious intolerance issues, lack of democracy, transparency in governance. Again, you mentioned all that. They want to restrict India's trade with Russia, Iran, Venezuela. They want to weaken Indian leadership to the point that it is amenable to arm twisting by them, and then we should not put all our eggs in the US basket. then how are we natural partners? I'm not saying that you said it was in inverted commas, but the general discourse that we are natural partners, is there a problem in this formulation?
I think that was a period of optimism and maybe some rhetoric there. You rightly said, I put it in quotes. It's not my view. It's you mentioned all the reservations that we must have vis-a-vis the United States, but it's also undeniable that our relationship with the United States is extremely important for our continued growth, whether it is markets, whether it is investments, whether it is technology, whether it is people-to-people contacts, whether it is our dependence on the systems in the world, be it financial, stock markets, currency, digital world. These are all America controlled. Now, you can't get away from that reality. And therefore, I think what I have said is that in order to grow, we must have the United States with us, or at least it should not be hostile to us. That, I think, is the essence of what I'm trying to say. Therefore, on things which matter, we have to put our foot down with our vital interests. On others, we may have to compromise.
Well, there's an interesting thing about Europe, which you have said,
Hmm.
that is strategically marginal,
Yeah.
which there are no people from the European Union here. But you've said that Germany has begun to flex its muscles against other European countries and perhaps US too. At the moment, the opposite is happening. Germany has become relatively very weak. Its economy is in trouble. It is choosing the American option rather than the European option, even in the area of defense, because that is at the root of any region or a country developing strategic autonomy. It is not choosing Europe. It is choosing the United States of America. That additional $100 billion, which they announced in terms of increase in budget, it has gone to purchase American weaponry and not European-made weaponry. So do you really think that Germany, with the largest US base on its territory, nuclear weapons stationed on its soil, has a choice to become, must flex its muscles against the United States? And look at what happened to the Nord Stream 2.
Yeah.
I mean, Scholz goes there to the United States, standing next to Biden. Biden tells the correspondent that we will finish the Nord Stream pipeline, and Scholz meekly accepts that, doesn't utter a word.
I think there's a disconnect between the present leadership and what public in Germany wants. I could be wrong, but this is my sense. Secondly, I don't think that Germany is sanguine about the East Europeans and the Baltics as the new pretenders to European leadership. And thirdly, even with all its weaknesses as a result of Nord Stream 2, the nuclear weapons on its soil and so forth, as Germany is still the economic engine of Europe. There's this hangover from the past, and I don't know why it is so. Maybe there's a guilt feeling in Germany, but I think with the new generation coming on, there is a different attitude in Germany. And my understanding of Germany and the Germans is that the inherent strengths of Germany will at some point reassert themselves. Now, if NATO were to weaken, if as Trump says, then Germany will play a role. So it's not something that I don't think that Germany will concede leadership in Europe to Poland and the Baltics.
My second last question is is in your very comprehensive coverage of every region of the world and what India's interests are, how India should look at it. Compliments to you. The canvas is very wide, but you will not focus on Africa and Latin America at all. Why is that?
This is more about the strategic aspects on Africa and Latin America. On Africa, I have talked.
Only in the Indian Ocean context, in the Eastern Seaboard.
Yeah.
But not our Africa policy.
Well, I think that our Africa policy is somewhat weak. And I think that my own understanding of Africa is somewhat limited. So it would be presumptuous of me to pontificate on Africa. And I do not know Africa that well. Latin America is something which has been neglected for a while, partly because of distance. I think this is changing. Even with Africa, things are changing. I mean, the fact that now we have more missions there, the fact that we have got more interaction, even at the highest levels, all that means that the government itself is now giving more attention to Africa and Latin America. But if I were to look at it strategically, I would say that Africa is not posing the kind of problems for India or Latin America, is not that some of these other countries are. And therefore, in the wider picture, I think I have given it a little less space.
Well, in the context of BRICS, I think both Africa and Latin America would have relevance.
Yeah, they do. But BRICS itself is a little, we don't know which way it is headed. And you've seen what's happened in Brazil or South Africa. These are the other two major powers.
Well, the last issue I wanted to raise with you, which is about Akhand Bharat, question mark.
Which one? Akhand Bharat. Oh.
Question mark, which you were not very sure whether you are endorsing it or not endorsing it. But I recall the controversy that the map, the civilizational map of India and the parliament generated in Nepal, for instance, even that fact, they didn't want to accept that they are part of a larger Indic civilization. But where some people may not agree with you, I don't, but some others may not, which is that you seem to suggest that basically there's a fundamental harmony in the Indian subcontinent between all the countries, because we share culture, religion, dress, food habits, marriage and social customs, ways of thinking, cricket, popular films, songs, dance. There's emotional unity, as you say. And then you say that the dividing line between different religions, linguistic, ethnic, and were never sharp or clear cut. This is what you say about this part of the world. And that South Asia has a long tradition of communal harmony and peaceful coexistence through the centuries, at least till the colonizers, till the colonial era. Why do you say that? Because what you say is
no, it's
easily contested.
No,
by realities on the ground.
No. I think you got it wrong. That was not my intention. I think that there is a civilizational unity. And if you look at Pakistan or Bangladesh and so forth, there's a lot of cultural civilizational similarity. My point is that they cannot get away from that commonality. And yet, in order to assert themselves as modern nation states, they have to distance themselves from India. So there's a conflict between the civilizational cultural heritage and the modern identity. That is the main point I'm trying to make. Now, about communal harmony and so forth, Yes, there have been Hindu-Muslim conflicts over the centuries, but then most of those who are Muslim in the subcontinent today converted by the lure of money, land, jobs, titles. Yes, there were a lot of killings, and I think that this is probably insufficiently documented and talked about, the tens of millions of Hindus who were massacred and so forth. But yet, did you have communal incidents? You still have villages where Hindus and Muslims are living together. And why are it was only in the late 19th century and 20th century that the communal conflict started? I mean, so I think that there is something for us to reflect over. When I say Akhand Bharat, question mark, I'm saying that this space between the Hindu Kush and the Irrawaddy is the traditional civilizational India. And India has always been a civilization. Now we are trying to develop nation states where there was a civilization. And creating a nation state creates its own problems.
We've also said the creation of Pakistan was a manifestation of cultural separatism.
Yeah, because they say Hindus and Muslims cannot live together.
No, is that culture or religion?
Well, religion is a part of a culture. And so many.
The last point which you make, which you can try and explain what you meant, that Asia is like Europe, it has a common identity.
Yeah.
Empirically, do you think that this is a valid observation?
No, is Europe one? But they call themselves European. Look at the differences within Europe. But still, there's what is European? It is the Greco-Roman Christian heritage. That is Europe. And when this is now being threatened by immigration from other countries, mostly Muslim, they feel our civilization. So what is that civilization? So in Asia also, there's another civilization, which is basically centered around the Indic civilization, which spread all over Southeast Asia. The biggest temples and so forth of Hinduism and Buddhism are there. Or it spread to Afghanistan, or our people went to Africa. There's a Hindu and Buddhist culture in Khotan and those parts of there. Tibet is linked to India. So there is I think the group of religions which you call Hinduism or Jainism or Buddhism, there's a certain unity to that, which is I think there. So I'm only trying to suggest that let's not dismiss this concept of Asian. It is not so clear that we can say we are all Asian, but certainly Asians think differently. I think there is more emphasis on the social and family aspects rather than the individual. The rights of the individual is more important in Europe. In Asia, family matters more, society matters. I think these are the
Interesting. Anyway, I think External Affairs Minister who read your book very carefully, outlined its contents. I read the book too, and it's very readable. It touches all the areas of our foreign policy interest. It gives you concrete facts about our relationship, which is very useful and gives you a perspective, not necessarily in terms of concrete. As he said, the Minister said that quite rightly, that it is not unnecessarily prescriptive. You are not suggesting too much what should be done to reshape India's foreign policy, but you are raising all the issues that are there and some suggestions on how it can be reshaped. But in a sense, suggesting that there is a need to adapt ourselves to what is happening on the ground, because there are many, many conundrums that we have to solve. Thank you.
No, I think the last point you made is an important one, because my idea is to stimulate a debate. Maybe there's some thoughts of mine which are wrong. Maybe something will stimulate some thinking elsewhere. But the important thing is that we as a nation, as a people, need to start thinking more about our foreign policy problems, the choices that we have. And, you know, some of the decisions that people outside, forget government, outside government, take industrialists, take students, take ordinary people. What can they do? I mean, if your industrialist is saying, I'd rather close down my factory and buy from China because it is more profitable, I'm making more money, that's a problem. Now, does the businessman think I should invest more in research? Do the armed forces think that we should trust our indigenous equipment more? Do our students and young people think that the promised land remains the West, or do they think that they should stay in India and build a future for this country? These are all choices which people in society have to make, and therefore they should understand what are the stakes involved. And I'm just hoping that my book will cause some rethinking and among our own people.
Thank you. I think this was a very engaging conversation. It helped tweak those difficult aspects of foreign policy, which we don't talk about. It is like culture, the role of Akhand Bharat, the civilizational unity and all that. I think these are the debates we should be having, because otherwise foreign policy becomes only about strategy and only about budgets and so on. So I think this last part was really very, I'm glad you brought up the issue of Akhand Bharat and what it means. And so maybe we'll take, I think, two questions, exactly two questions, because otherwise we are very, yes, there. Exactly two I will take, and then you will answer.
Yes, good morning, sir. I am Premansh Sinha, an undergraduate student of political science at Ramdas College, University of Delhi. So my question is very direct and brief. So what is the future of the Assumption Island project that has been stalled for over 9 years due to popular opposition and due to popular opposition in Seychelles, with the string of pearls policy of China encircling India in the Western Indian Ocean region and its military base in Djibouti? Do you think we are facing a setback with the failure of the Assumption Island project? Thank you, sir.
Which project?
The Assumption Island project, which was India was planning to establish a base in the south of Seychelles.
You know, I think let's not assume that these things have failed. These are all work in progress. And one thing I've learned in my life, and I've spent more time in government, twice the amount of time in government as I have after retirement outside government. And I can assure you that the government has a lot more information, a lot more options than we are aware of. So we should trust our government. Yes, we should give them the ideas kind that you have given, but at the end of the day, governments have a role to play, and they do it on the basis of information that you and I are not aware of. There are also constraints. After all, why is it that the Cabinet Committee on Security includes the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Finance, the Defense, and the Home Minister? Because these issues of security have so many aspects that you and I may not be aware of.
One question. Yes, Yogi.
Thank you. It's been a stimulating time listening to you and, of course, to our Honorable Minister. Just one question regarding the Akhand Bharat issue that I want to read with greater care. You talk about strategic conundrums. So how do we actually leverage or build the Akhand Bharat idea into our strategic thinking, in the sense that delivers some concrete results for us as we advance our strategic interests? Thank you.
Well, we should start thinking as Indians first instead of trying to divide ourselves on caste and other bases, which is what our politicians are busy doing nowadays. I think that the concept of civilizational unity is extremely important for India. Again, I invoke Swami Vivekananda. He said that the strength of India, the USP of India, is our religion and spirituality. This is something we have to give to the world, which we have been giving to the world. Now, if we ignore that, if we denigrate our own religion, our spirituality, then what are we giving? We have to be confident of ourselves that we are a great nation, we are a great civilization. We have been so. Instead of Indians constantly running down our own country, which I find very, very regrettable and sad. That's something that we as a people, as a country, need to change.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think we'll bring this event to a close with congratulations once again to the author. I'm sure this book will lead to a lot of discussion and debate. And as you could see, there's interest among the young.
Yeah, I'm
people.
very happy.
And I hope you take it to the universities and other places, and we can
I hope
continue
so.
to discuss. So, Dhanyavad, thank you very much.
Thank
you, sir. Let's give a hand to.